Hey everybody, welcome to our channel about fun things like video games and stuff.
If you're here and you don't like video games, you're in the wrong space.
Yeah,
But we're back. We're back. It's been a while,
we
right?
survived GDC 2022.
That we did. It was harrowing. Um,
Yep,
no,
not
it
heroin
was
though.
relatively fine. It was just the fallout of the end of it, and like knowing one of the people that we both worked with early on, uh, getting COVID early on, and then seeing it spread from there was kind of interesting.
Yep,
But it wasn't events that had full. I think everybody in attendance had to be vaxxed and boosted, and if you weren't, you had to have. If you weren't boosted, you had to have daily tests being administered that said
yep,
you were clear. But still, it managed to spread because those people who were boosted were not being tested, and it turns out that some of them were able to get COVID and pass it.
yeah. Several people that I know I hung out with on Friday have since contacted me and others to say, hey, even though I was vaxxed and boosted, I have now come down positive with the virus. I feel fine. Thankfully, they all, with the exception of one person, feel fine. And that's sort of, in a way, just sort of lucky because it can go either way. But this is, to my
Well,
mind, the vaccines doing their job.
yeah, I mean that's basically what it is. It's like as we know, basically if you're vaccine boosted, your likelihood of getting significantly ill is low.
Right.
The likelihood of you passing it is not low, and I think that's the bigger issue. Because it could become a super spreader event. Oh well. But
Yay.
we've been gone for about a month, mostly because we had some major things happening at our company that we will not talk about, but good things either way.
Hmm.
Yeah. Then we went into GDC mode and we had to prepare for that and attend. So we did all of those things. So we were gone for a while. But we're back now, and interestingly enough, like 3 or 4 weeks of not being on doing a Sonic Boom Live ends up dumping a lot of interesting game news on your lap. So we have a lot to cover today. Eric, what are we
Yeah.
going to cover? All the topics.
Well, the topics I'm gonna just quickly go through them. We're gonna have talk about how E3 2022 has officially been canceled. Hooray! Sort of, not
Yeah.
really. CDPR or CD Project Red, makers of games such as The Witcher series and Cyberpunk 2077. They are shifting to Unreal Engine 5 for The Witcher 4 release for Witcher 4. Sony, their Project Spartacus, which we've previously chatted about on this channel, has been actually announced with all the details. And we're going to cover that and sort of compare it to Microsoft Game Pass and other similar offerings. And then finally, nope, not finally, PlayStation gets the variable refresh rate technology, or it is known coming. Not out yet, but it's coming. We're going to discuss that. PSVR2 has been shown behind closed doors at GDC, and there's some interesting factoids related to that we can discuss. And finally, now we're at the finally, the next Zelda, the Breath of the Wild 2, or whatever that follow up is, has officially been delayed until 2023.
Yeah.
And we will discuss that as well.
I think the most interesting topics are actually the ones that probably sound the most boring, which is like, how
Yeah.
much could you actually talk about Witcher 4 going to on UE5? You're like, there's actually a bit more there. It's got some depth to it.
Yeah, especially for folks who are sort of interested in the industry. If you're looking at like my favorite game is whatever, and you want to just follow that news, that may not pique your interest as much. But if you're interested in how the game industry works and what goes on behind the scenes, that's absolutely going to be more interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's see. Yeah, let's just get into it. The big topic I think actually is E3. Getting announced today that they're not doing the virtual conference. And as you had mentioned in our Instagram, they had also notified everybody that physical, their physical, I guess like
In-person event.
in-person event was
Yeah.
donezo. I mean, there was an in-person event.
Yeah.
It just no one was going to be invited to it. So like they would have like basically a stage for people to be showing off stuff and probably doing the regular stuff. I imagine Jeff Keighley is still going to like sweep in there and do his usual deal.
Yeah. Since the announcement, apparently there's a tweet from him that is just a winky face.
Yeah, exactly. I think he's been prepping himself for this for a while.
Yeah.
I think ever since COVID, like 2020, they kind of stepped up to the plate and was like, we're still going to do something, but we're going to kind of change up the way E3 does. Basically doing like the more interesting parts of E3, but in a much more compact way. And I actually think it's one of the most important parts of E3 that Jeff Keighley and his group are like fulfilling.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see that he's winking at this because I imagine it's going to keep going. So
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit. Like what made E3 so impactful for the industry, 20 years ago versus 20 years ago versus what we have today? Because people talk about it, but I personally sort of am of the opinion that a lot of it is nostalgia driven, that it's like, oh, it's E3 time, like let's get hyped and energy from this. To me personally, E3 meant something very different 20 years ago versus what it means now. Can you speak to that? I can go in on that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's two sides of it. Yeah, what it means to the consumer, which it was like the equivalent of getting the Christmas catalog in fall, like in whatever it was, September, where you could look at all the new toys that are going to be out for the holiday. And it's the same principle here, is that E3 strategically placed at a point in time in the summer where most devs for their winter games would be going into a late beta or even like a cert period where they would be trying to get their game out the door and in disc form within like a month or so.
Cartridge.
Yeah, or cartridge. Yeah, 20 years ago. And in the rate of which games were coming out back in 1995 when they were starting, you get one publisher doing like maybe 2 or 3 games a year. Now there is a constant deluge of great games coming out from both indie and like the large publishers, but that's the consumer side of it that was interesting. On the publisher side, it was the opportunity for publishers to be able to say, like, here's our stuff, and here's what you can expect for the holiday in near finished state. But the other side of it too was, especially with like the PS2 era, I'd say that there's a lot of like posturing of the major console developers, Sony, Xbox, and Nintendo, for them to give you like a year ahead or even longer, like the long-term view of what an investment in their console would look like, which I think was also very special and added to the pomp and circumstance of E3 traditionally.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it boils down to communication. Our communication approaches have changed dramatically at this point. When I think about E3 and the nostalgia and what made it so awesome for me was picking up, as you mentioned, the like August, September issue of your favorite magazine, your game in EGM. EGM was huge. And it would literally be twice as thick as any other month in the year because it had all of it was like the E3 special edition for the year. And it had write-ups of like as much stuff as they could cram into the issue, with like pages littered with little blurbs about interesting titles or the main titles and native features and everything, and like pictures of the booths to really give you energy and a sense of the space and the excitement. And it was, as you said, it was like a Christmas catalog. It was like you see this and suddenly you're like, okay, most games in that space would be pitched for the holiday season, so you're kind of like looking at it saying, okay, what games, where am I going to put my holiday wish list? Like what's getting on there? Alternatively, some games would be announced more for, as you mentioned, the vision and saying, okay, this is how Nintendo is going to, talk about their product catalog and the games they're shipping over the next 2 to 3 years. And they would say, announce Mario is coming and give a little sneak peek or something like that. And you wouldn't see it for 5 years, but it was there and it kept the conversation running. We don't need that anymore. Nintendo has Nintendo Direct on YouTube. Like back in those days, it was for viewing, it was broadcast television or cable. Both of those were expensive to put your content on. You were advertising, which is big bucks. And you weren't guaranteed to hit your audience. At this point, everybody knows what YouTube channel, or just Google like Nintendo E3 or Nintendo Direct, literally that, and you get the latest straight from Nintendo. And the same thing goes for Sony and Microsoft. So that whole aspect sort of fell away. We don't have game journalism in the same way anymore. There's no magazines where you get them once a month and then you spend a week or two, or depending on how voracious you are of a reader, going through that, like digging into all the information that you can as your most up-to-date source of information. Because now you literally get it all hours of the day. Like if you want to go all the way to the source, sometimes you just follow the game developers and game publishers like on Twitter, and literally you'll be the first to know if you really care. Yeah.
Now, I think the thing that's worth talking about now is like, how did E3 kind of lose its cachet in the industry? Yeah. I can speak to
No, go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, the first thing I'd speak to, and I'm sure you have more, but it's as E3, as the industry sort of was able to update things in real time, with like internet video and all that stuff, being able to allow developers to present their vision whenever they want, just by releasing a slickly edited video. Beyond that, the industry started finding itself in some hot water over a couple things, not least of which was like women at booths and how they're treated, and it's like troublesome issues that came up with them trying to come up with modernized ideas of what gaming is, who consumes games, all that stuff, and they were behind the curve. They defended it for a while. They finally started outlawing it, and it started tarnishing what E3 was for a lot of people as like one of the first things that happened, and why E3 was being questioned as a great platform for the game industry to be showing itself off.
Yeah.
Do you have any other examples or other issues that showed up that have caused issues for E3, and maybe why these nails are getting hammered into its coffin?
Yeah, I'd say two more. They're not as big as the one that you talked about, because that controversy was sort of about E3, but also about the greater games industry as a whole, right?
Yeah.
Specifically related to E3 were complaints that they would receive about sort of two things, and one was the loudness. I went to the last E3 before they shut down for a year and came back 2 years, or they went down to like the private quiet mode, and then that was terrible and everybody hated it. So they sort of reset again in 2007, I think. But in 2005, you would walk in and they would have Tylenol or Advil like in little individual packets and bins, so that you could effectively take headache medicine, because they knew once you wandered around the show floor, you'd come out with like a headache from all the noise. They also had earplugs, because you'd walk in and you'd just be assaulted with sound. And people with sensitive ears, or those who have golden ears and don't want to ruin them with just loud, obnoxious sounds, would be happily put those in order. They would have to have them in order to enter such a building. It was ridiculous. All of the people putting on their booths would try to outdo each other on volume to grab your attention, right? They're trying to get journalists and whomever to pay attention to them. So they would blast their audio. The other aspect that's related is the cost. So a huge cost for publishers in particular to put on their booths and attract journalists and do all of this stuff. A lot of that money just went into the booth every year, coming up, designing the booth, building the booth, putting all the technology into it with like big, beautiful screens to show off the games that are coming up, having all of like the dev kits set up inside of the systems so that they could play the demos and have them easily resettable in case things crashed, which they did.
Yeah.
These were pre-release versions of games that were not prepped as beta releases. They were sort of vertical slices that had bugs, and they'd have people manning it and watching it and saying, hold on, click reset, and then have someone step over to another open console. A lot of that cost sort of just literally ate into the bottom line for many games, and it became just way too much for people to compete. And I think Nintendo was one of the first people to bow out because they were like, it is not what we're not seeing the return that we need in order to make the expense required to get the expected tier, to reach that tier, is just not worth it for us.
Yeah, and I'd say like part of the reason why this is happening or had happened is because of just there's a weird thing that's happened in game development in general, and this leads to this point, which is like at a point in time, the cost to develop a game was, I don't know, in the millions, like 5 to 10 million. This is like the PS2, PS3 era, in which games were costing that. In the PS3 era, they started ballooning up to like hundreds of millions for some of the top AAA titles. The issue with the way like the industry has sort of split apart is your game is either super expensive in AAA tier, and you need to grab attention for it to pay back what it cost. And then there's like the small publisher indie group, which is games that are less than $10 million to produce, usually within like the million-ish to like 5 million cost. And this is what we get. And plus there's like straight up indie devs where there's like one guy working on it, not accounting for any cost, and then like a publisher helps him out in advertising. But that has led to like an evening out of the playing field. So even though your $100 million game can cost that, a $1 million game can steal a spotlight if it's innovative enough, because it's just like the proliferation of tools and how this has happened. So for like Sony or Nintendo to be putting that much money into a single game and going to E3 and not getting the attention that they need, it's bad news for them. It's even worse if they're being pushed to release something at E3 2 years before it's ever going to be released and put a bad foot forward. And this happened to Ubisoft with
what was the name of that game?
Yeah.
Something dogs.
Watch Dogs.
Watch Dogs.
Yes. I kept on thinking like Watchmen. I'm like, that's
not it. we each had one half of it. We got there.
Dogs, Watch. Yeah, Watch Dogs, it was bad for them. There's been, I think, Tom Clancy games that have done the same thing.
Yeah.
Bethesda with Fallout 76. So this has happened enough times. I think it still even happened last year, where some people were like, this is not the game that they're kind of pitched.
Oh, totally. Yeah. The thing, and this is something that's we talked a lot about with the PS5 and Xbox Series X announcements, where Sony thankfully was very good about saying this is pre-rendered video and content. They actually had text on it and said this is in-game captured on a PS5 when it was apt. In the past, and I think we dinged a little bit Microsoft for not doing this in their early series of console announcements,
where a lot of the games were clearly pre-rendered.
Right, and they didn't mention it, so there was a lot of not knowing when new generation comes out. Everyone's expecting a huge increase in graphics fidelity and whatever. So it's a little bit like, but is that looks pre-rendered? Is that just because things are really good in the next generation, or is that actually just because it's a vision vertical slice created, video? And a lot of in the past games like Watch Dogs, games like the Rainbow Six series, and there's one, as you said, recently, like a year ago, that had the same problem where they said, here's what the game's going to be. And it was a pre-rendered video that was, here's what our target is.
I mean, CDPR is the most recent example of this, right?
Yeah.
Like specifically with Cyberpunk 2077, just their, whatever it was, the demo like 2 or 3 years ago. Well,
yeah,
3 or 4 years ago, I guess. But 2 years before release, showing a version of the game that was just not going to be made was too was too heady for even them, and they couldn't deliver on the image or the vision. This is hugely damaging. So you have, I think the point is like you have these people can like these huge publishers competing with lots and lots of money behind a game, being forced to show their hand when they may not actually be ready to do it, and then that ultimately damaging them in such a heinous way that a game like Cyberpunk can lose a publisher money and potentially cause issues in the future.
Here's another example that is the reverse. Halo Infinite, where it was shown too early, and people like you and I just nitpicked it, and we're like, "This is like there's pop in, there's like the exploding enemies just kind of like hit a T pose or equivalent, or just like have this still body and a flat expression as they go pew off into the like Craig, right? Like people love their games, and if it's not ready and you're not very particular about the video that you put forth, like that game was incomplete. It wasn't ready to be shown, but they needed something, and they're like, it's the big Halo announcement, so we'll put in our best foot forward. And that they had to go and cover their butts on it and sort of play what's the term here for this, what's that?
Referee?
No, they had to play like I don't know, EMT or something like that. Some kind of like first responder to be like, oh, I got to go patch this up. And
I mean, they had to run a fun PR campaign to try to cover themselves for the
right.
Them coming out with Halo and it looking below what people had expected.
Especially when they're like, this is their brand new top of the line console, and people are looking at it and be like, what's special about that? Like, why?
No, I mean, this is the reason why I think publishers are walking away from it. And like, part of before E3 was officially canceled, this followed Nintendo and Sony pulling out, EA pulling out, and so it's like, how much of a showcase can you actually have for the industry when your biggest publishers are like backing away because it's just too risky for them, I think the issue with E3, I mean, and to say COVID is like the nail in the coffin for them, or at least for now. But the biggest issue is that these publishers can't be risking, and in the risking like showing a title too early, or showing their hand when it's not ready, and giving the wrong impression of the game. Or competing with another game that may cost a lot less with them. So, it's too risky for these big publishers to be doing that. And the E3's format is just never really adapted for what the industry is today. And the biggest value it gives is like a good platform for indies to be able to show their stuff and get publicity behind their game and get publishers interested in their titles. Yeah. But that's not what E3 is supposed to be. So like they're it's like wrong size, and it's not a one size fits all for the industry at this point. So what we're seeing now is publishers are walking away and doing their own thing. They'll do their highly polished videos that they'll release around E3 that will show off their vision for the future and their next set of games. Microsoft, EA, Ubisoft, Nintendo, Sony will all be doing that. And then for the indies, it looks like Jeff Keighley and what he was doing since 2020 is going to be filling in that gap that I think indies were using from E3, and now it's going to be fulfilled by a different format that's actually more catered to that need. To to go show long gameplay videos of these upcoming games, stir up excitement, but not having to have giant booths. It's like just sit down with the developer, talk about it, and they can show off some gameplay so you can get hyped about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think EA's the remake of Dead Space. Yeah, that video sort of proved out a model almost. Where they announced it and they're like had some developer commentary as well, which gets people hyped about like, oh, they're really caring about this game and here's how this is working, and that was going to be way cheaper to produce than a booth. Yes. And then setting up a lot of And also the one last thing I'll say about this before I think we should probably move on
Yes.
is there's an aspect of the game sales side of things with the publishers dealing with retail that E3 classically was a great place for people like representatives from Walmart and GameStop and all of the Target to show up and deal with the companies that wanted their games to have prime location on an end cap or something like that, and work out deals like that. How many copies of a game are going to go to Target versus Walmart versus whatever? They would work out those deals in that space, and then they'd know how many to press, how many discs to press and ship, and get their order numbers for the holidays, whatever. That doesn't really apply to the industry these days, as more and more game sales are shifting to digital, where the platform holder
controls sales in the sales platform.
Exactly. And it becomes a situation where GameStop, which was sort of disliked by much of the games industry simply because of their used games model. Great for consumer, terrible for developers, because when you buy a used game on week 2 of its release, instead of spending the $60 and the developer getting a $45 of that or whatever it was, you buy it for $45 and all of that money goes to GameStop. None of it goes to the developer.
Yeah, where they usually get like $15.
Yeah. So they were GameStop made money hand over fist on that model, but the developers were seeing that come out of their bottom line pretty substantially as it got more popular. And so the developers are saying, well, what's great is licensing the software on the platforms, the stores, because there's no resale. We don't have to worry about that. We'll get even if we reduce the cost for a sale, or after the first 2 months, we cut $10 off, but we still get that. The platform, of course, gets what they get, but that's it.
Yeah.
So, and that's a direct, there's no more having to deal with Walmart or anything there.
Yeah, which I think is probably preferable by most publishers at this point. So
yeah.
So E3, when it decides to come back in 2023, they need to do some serious revamping of the platform.
Find something.
And at this point, they're going to be competing more with PAX and what PAX actually does.
Yes,
being consumer-based facing show. So it's yet to be seen, but they're going to have a hard time recovering what E3 is supposed to be and what E3 is, and turning it into something that can actually be profitable for the ESA. So we'll see. Let's move on to the next topic.
Let's do. Woo.
The next topic is CDPR announced during E3 that Witcher 4 is in fact coming. Why they timed it with GDC? I said E3. I said GDC. So during GDC, CDPR had announced that Witcher 4 was coming, which I mean is rather predictable. But they chose to talk about it at GDC specifically because the Red Engine is not being favored here. So Cyberpunk 2077 and the Witcher games were all developed on an internal engine in Poland called their Red Engine. And Witcher 4 was announced to be using Unreal Engine 5. Now, GDC is a good place for Epic and Unreal to be making announcements because it's a developer-focused conference.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about this announcement, why it was announced then, is because CD Projekt Red choosing to use Unreal 5 is more strategic than it is practical, I'd say, or it's a little bit of both. But it's strategic because both Unreal, specifically UE5, needs to be put through its paces on an actual game.
Other than just Fortnite.
Yeah, I know Fortnite's not using UE5 anyways.
No, it is. Fortnite is shipping. It's shipping on UE5 now.
Okay.
It's not using. I don't think it's using Nanite.
No, it's not. None of the cool tech is being used.
It's an optional renderer, but it is being shipped on a UE5. Yeah.
Yeah, but they need a publisher other than themselves to be running the engine through its paces, and there's like no better a game than like Witcher, which is a open
Yeah.
world, very full, very colorful, very well presented world that now has the cinematic counterpart, via Netflix to probably set a new standard for its visual quality. So having CDPR ditch the Red Engine for this is a practical strategic decision from Unreal that they're working together on to really put the engine through its paces and probably develop technologies that they need for it to be used in more games. Do you have any specific take on this, Eric?
Um, not not especially. I mean, it makes sense to me on a business
On the
standpoint.
practicality level, right?
Yeah,
Or
for if I'm CD Project Red and I'm coming off of a project like Cyberpunk 2077, I'm literally taking stock of everything. Everything. That game went through development hell in terms of it was delayed, I believe, several times. Um, as far as I'm aware, there was a lot of crunch going on in the
yes,
team. None of that is good at all. It's not good, in terms of how the industry views the studio, how the employees view the studio. It clearly didn't result in a perfect game, right? Like it had serious problems on ship, and they just had to get it out to appease their investors and like not delay anymore. But even that caused serious problems where they refunded a ton of copies, and like I think Sony effectively sort of automatically refunded everything, like because it was so poor that they were like, oh, this is it. Anyone who asks us for a refund will get one on that game.
yeah. I mean, they were reacting to very negative press,
Right. Yeah. I mean,
and like the typically loudest, most obnoxious part of the game industry,
yes,
consumer side of things that were haranguing it.
but rightfully so in many respects because it was crashing constantly on the console at launch.
I mean, it's rightfully so, but also
Yeah.
exaggerated.
Yeah, sure. It was
Yeah.
the hype of the moment. It was the hype train, and people got on the hype train. Sure. At the same time, I'm not going to sit back and say like, oh, it was just the hype. When literally people in the games industry would look at the game and say, how did they get this past cert?
Yeah.
How did this game make it past certification and get onto the PlayStation Store? Like that's one of those things where it was almost representing Sony poorly in that respect. And Sony said, no, we're gonna.
Ish.
They
Like
delisted it.
I will say this, and this is my defense of CDPRs, and this is probably going to get me, if anybody actually listens to this, like shouting at me. But CDPR did not meet a standard that was significantly worse than other titles that have been released on consoles. Specifically looking at like games from Bethesda, where the initial releases are like reasonably problematic, bug filled, crashy. The difference is that CDPR set a bad expectation for what the game was going to be, and it drastically underdelivered on what that promise was on last gen consoles.
I think they were a little more extreme. Having talked to some of the developers at CDPR about the project and how they were still fighting with the bugs, like so many deep bugs for quite a while afterwards, I think it was a little bit worse than the comparison you just made. I think.
I don't know. Fall 3 crashed on me very excessively.
Sure. I'm not. That's not to say that there were other games that were
Well, I mean,
also
that's
crashing.
my point. Is that like, yeah, it should have passed cert. Games of that caliber have passed cert before because of
That should.
the status of the game, and so you have people like Sony and Xbox going like, yeah,
We'll give it a pass.
we'll give it a pass. It's got to be patched.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
I think the core difference, like I said, is that the CDPR's biggest fault was that they set the expectations completely incorrectly.
Well, I think it was also potentially related to the number of sales that they had initially as well. Like it had been pre-ordered by a bajillion people as you said, their expectations weren't met. Who, excuse me, thought they were buying a very different game from what they got. They miscalibrated with their vision teasers and everything. And if you look at videos from that time about the release version of the game, there are lots and lots of videos about all the crashiness and all the
Yeah.
weird bugs and problems with it. Where and if you look at any of the patches that have come out since and the litany of issues they've resolved, and each one doing that, it's like wild. But let's see, we're going a little off topic here. The point about this is like CD Projekt Red had a huge project in their hands with Cyberpunk 77. They shot high, didn't quite meet the mark, at least initially. That's not to say the game isn't good. It's to say that the game was fraught with problems to start, and they've been since that time and continue to still address some of those issues with bug fixes, which is great, right? My hope is that this game turns around to be a classic in the way that No Man's Sky did it. And they kind of turned around their story.
For that matter, where like it grew long legs, long into its development.
Yeah, that had a long tail of sales and everything. Yeah, I totally agree. That would be great. And those developers are fantastic and they deserve it. But hopefully, hopefully their bug fixes and their producers will allow them to do that. But anyway, so why did they switch to UE5? Coming off of a project of that scale, and a project where you spend so much time working on just the hardware, all of the fundamental pieces to make that work across, call it, I don't know, at least 4 consoles, because you had the PS4, PS5, kind of 5 consoles. More than that, like 6 or 7 or 8 consoles, because of like PS4, PS4 Pro, PS5. Then you have the Xbox One, the Xbox One X, the Xbox Series S, the Xbox Series X. Like all of those have their own playback characteristics. You have to make sure that memory fits in all of the devices. Then you have the Windows build and all the different hardware that Windows deals with. Like as an engine programmer, you're spending a lot of your time just dealing with trying to abstract all of that stuff and make it work across the board. That's a lot of development time and a huge cost. And we're talking about a game that's shooting for like best-in-class graphics and best-in-class audio and best-in-class gameplay, all in the same engine that's cross-generation, cross-platform. That is such an immense amount of work. Epic does this. Unity does this. Epic arguably does it better in the same tier of game quality that CD Projekt Red is used to working in. And they have a massive team of people whose sole purpose is to build that technology. They make their money almost solely to do that and make that work. I mean, now they have Fortnite, but whatever, that pays a lot of the bills to enable them to build this stuff. And when you're looking ahead and saying, well, we just went through development hell to try to get this engine to a level where it was sort of presentable and representative of the now current generation, do we really want to go through and try to continue to push on that? Like, I'm guessing there's some fatigue at the company, having been at companies where
there's attrition at the company.
That too.
Yeah, they've lost some of their top engineers. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, well noted. It's also, I think, on the Epic side of things, the engine, their engine. Mm-hmm. We saw the PlayStation 5 demo, the one where I don't remember what they call it, but it's like where the woman is walking through the cave and they show up in the Danitech and all that stuff. Great for specific types of environments. More specifically, like static environments that can just look well. And this has been a thing with UE for a while. It was the case with UE 3 or 4, like UE 3 with Gears of War. Yeah. So you could get like these really beautiful textures on things, but the interactivity, the type of beauty it gives to something is built for specific games. And I think it was pointed out that like I think on Digital Foundry that, and this is something you can verify for yourself, but it's foliage and systems like that aren't good or functional or work with even within Nanite currently, because I mean, there's a lot of reasons you can break down why, but basically textures that move opposed to photogrammetry, which is on background like background terrain and whatnot, it poses some problems. So, everything that we've seen from it is like Matrix, that cityscape. Nothing's interactive. We look at the demos, they're like caves and stuff like that, where you don't really get a lot of interactions. Now they did show off like cloth simulations and fluid simulations, that sort of thing. But when we're talking about dense foliage, that's going to cover up a lot of the photogrammetry models. It then starts posing a problem, and so they need to develop parts of the engine out further to give it the same level of fidelity that Nanite gives to background geometry to things that are active and interactive within the environment, and that's something that I think CDPR is going to bring to them, because their needs are going to be foliage rich woods and forests and plains lands and all that stuff that like UE5 is not, the tech that is in UE5 is not well equipped for. So if you're going to be able to sell UE5 as an engine for all types of games, it really needs to be pushed in certain directions that the current flashy tech in UE5 just doesn't actually address.
Well, the flashy tech, sure, because you're right, there are severe limits. Like Nanite, to my understanding, does not support animation.
No,
you can stick
lighting,
animated,
but not animation.
Yes, but you can stick animation on top of it with their other systems. Like Nanite is sort of one rendering mode and model that they support, and you can have other rendering going on with that. It just becomes heavy.
Very heavy. I mean, even the Matrix demo ran heavy.
It did.
Yeah. It ran at 30 frames per second, and I think the fidelity was like, or the resolution was like less than 1440p.
Yeah, I what I would have to do is watch the DF, the digital.
Yeah, I actually think they do a good breakdown of it, but the general takeaway is that they're dropping frame rate pretty significantly. Now the demo allows you to do some pretty things that you wouldn't normally be able to do in game. Like you can start like massive traffic accidents, and the car deformation systems don't work with Nanite and are adding on top of that and adding complexity to the rendering pipeline that it clearly does not handle well. It was a solution for the demo. You also you can pull out to like more than a 50-foot view, because you can just fly up into the sky and ask this thing to be rendering an awful lot of geometry, which it does. Yeah, it does. There's some issues with it, but yeah, these are the sort of things that like, okay, there's performance issues. The demo's clearly not meant to be like an example of
the perfect thing.
This is what games can start to look like in the future if developers want to push for this sort of games.
And they'll keep iterating on it. I am not sure if I will keep an eye out, but it has not, to my understanding, been mentioned at all whether Witcher 4 will use Nanite for rendering. I would not be surprised if they didn't, if they just don't use it.
I mean, for their type of game, it'd be weird.
Right.
Or if they could selectively use Nanite, like once you go into like a small castle village where you don't have foliage, you have puddles of water and rock.
Even if you had foliage, but they figured out a way to like mask out the stuff that's blocked by the foliage before trying to render it, so that you get sort of pockets where Nanite rendering happens in the screen, and then you sort of almost checkerboard your display so that you can use Nanite rendering over here with some stuff that bleeds onto it and just layer them in the render, right? Like something like that I could see happening, but it almost seems like, given the art direction of previous Witcher games, the photogrammetry model, I'm not sure really fits that space.
No, not for like the wide open areas. Like I said, I could see it once you pass into a space like a house or into a village where you can narrow down what gets rendered. Then I could see them making it performant for that type of game and giving the fidelity that like Nanite gives and the sort of lighting that.
I guess I'm not sure that you would want that fidelity for a Witcher's title, right? Like they're not going for. Maybe they are,
That's
but
the thing is like maybe they are like yeah, Witcher up
I
until The
don't
Witcher
know.
3 had no cinematic counterpart. But the people
Right.
who you're going to be dragging into Witcher 4 are going to be people who have also experienced now the Netflix series, and there's going to probably be some amount of crossing over of the two unless they really do a good job
Well,
at keeping it away from each other.
yeah, we'll have to see. I suspect this move has, personally, I suspect this move has more to do with CD Projekt Red saying, if we go with Unreal, we don't have to train people to use our custom tools. We don't have to build our own custom tools. We can literally hire people who have UE4 or UE5 experience. There are tons of them in the industry. They're very much going to be faster to get onboarded. And we get support from Epic on building this. And we then can refocus all of our engine people on just improving where we need it
Right.
in the Unreal Engine, right? Like
And
there's
probably sharing tech at that point, which is like,
oh
okay,
yeah,
we got our
absolutely.
engine people to develop this that works really well for our
Yeah.
game and is performant and allows us to render the way we want it. And Epic gets to probably commandeer
Benefits
some of that
from
tech for themselves
Yep.
and make it part of the development kits that they send off to
Yeah.
developers.
Yeah. And I think Epic yeah, I mean I would I would say the one thing for folks who hear UE5 and think of that demo, the PS5 demo or the Matrix demo, I would just caution folks to be aware that UE5 does not specifically mean nanite rendering. Nanite is a feature of UE5, but it is not the only way to render in UE5.
Yeah.
There are still improvements over the standard rendering approach that they have in UE4 already. Yeah, they're just going to keep iterating on that aspect as well and improving things there.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the next topic. Probably not a ton to discuss here. It's just kind of interesting, but it's like the prefacing for it is Sony was rumored to be doing a project Spartacus. I don't remember who announced it specifically. I think it might have been Bloomberg, but
Or Business Insider, one of the
yeah.
two.
But Project Spartacus was a rumored service that was going to from Sony that was going to rival or at least compete with Microsoft's Game Pass platform, which is looking to be quite successful for them. Still not scaled quite to the size that I think is matters, but it's on its way towards that. So I think within a year or so, Game Pass is going to be a beast to be reckoned with. So Sony, I think for a while was saying, hey, we don't need to do Game Pass. Our games are good enough on their own to merit, people paying $70 at minimum to play them. It's still unclear if this is 100% true. Sony's riding the wave of the PS4, but I think as the Game Pass gains steam, this may not hold as true, and you might see their services and platform eroding a bit. So they're doing their best to now stave this off by finally combining PlayStation Now and PlayStation Plus into some hybrid version of the service, which smartly, well, this is smart. I don't know why it took them so long to do this. I think they were greedy in the sense that they could go, well, we can get people to pay for two different services, and in total, pay whatever it is, $15 a month for Now and PlayStation Plus.
$10 for PlayStation Plus, yeah.
Yeah. So now and that leaves consumers confused. It may not get the sort of support they're looking for PlayStation Now, and it clearly wasn't, because Now is not their most the strongest performing service they provided.
2 to 3 million subscribers, I think.
Yeah. Versus tens of millions of Plus subscribers.
Yep.
So now it's all wrapped up into one package. You buy one service package based on what it is your needs are, and they made this clear. Do you want to go over the packages or anything like that, or do you want me to just rattle through them?
Well, why don't you rattle through them? I have many thoughts about this that I'm actually sort of miffed at Sony for a number of things, but we'll get to that.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
basically, the way things break out now is there's PlayStation Plus Essential, which is the same thing as PlayStation Plus was before, same price, period. Nothing new. They offered. They're now offering. It's called PlayStation Extra, or PlayStation Plus Extra, which starts to add some of these now features that we didn't have before. Basically, PS4 and PS5 titles that have been released already on PlayStation Now can be made available to you in this extra plan. It costs $15 monthly, which is basically the cost it would have been if you combine both services anyways. $100 yearly. Nothing really interesting there. The more interesting parts come at the premium service package, which adds 340 PS1, PS2, PS3, PSP, PS Vita titles as part of a package of games that you can download at any point in time, anytime you want, and those are persistently available to you as long as you're a subscriber to their premium package. Like I said, this one prices in at $18 monthly and $120 yearly. The other core feature to this whole thing is that they're introducing like time limited trials, which is new. This is presumably like you have a day to play this game as much as you can, and then once that day is done, it's gone. So certain titles you might be able to actually play through in entirety. This is similar to what Steam does actually with their trial access, but this is now wrapped into their premium package. So we have Essential, Extra, and Premium. They also added a Deluxe, but this is kind of a weird one depending on the region you're in. If you never had PlayStation Now, none of the other tiers are being offered to you. PlayStation Plus, PlayStation Extra, and PlayStation Deluxe are offered. Premium is not offered. The main reason is because Now is a streaming service. If you didn't have streaming service in your region before, you can't have it now. So Deluxe is offered instead. This wraps in all those 340 some odd games available to you. What gets omitted is PS3, because PS3 they can't emulate on the console, so it can't run natively there. It still has to be streamed, presumably from PS3 systems remotely that are running it. I'm sure these things will change over time, but that's your basic packages. Deluxe, there's no pricing information for it because it's region dependent. So,
Yep.
And for North America, Europe, Japan, Now was already available, so you're going to be just dealing with the premium package if you want streaming plus PS1 through PS5 games available to you via download or streaming.
The one thing that I would add as a correction to all of that is that the price of Extra, which is basically PlayStation Now right now, plus, it's the PS4 and PS5 playable stuff, and PlayStation Plus, is not the same price as though you'd combine PlayStation Now and PlayStation.
Yeah, that's fair, right? Because I think the combined price would be 160.
Yeah, because 120.
120
for a year, because they were $60 a year both. They're both $10 a month. They're both $60 a year for PlayStation Now and PlayStation Plus. Yeah, no, that's all right. It's just a small detail. It also isn't this. It's not all. I think PlayStation Now includes PS3 titles, right?
No,
for streaming, no.
For streaming only, but PS3 titles are not currently included in it. It's there, so they're adding what used to be available were PS1 titles, PSP titles.
You had to like rent them or something for the PS3 ones to stream.
No, there wasn't streaming. There wasn't PS3 title streaming. There's PS4, PS5 games in their streaming service as it is currently, and then there's PS2 titles that have been ported over to PS4 that are available, and I think PS1 titles.
I thought they had PS3 streaming.
No.
In PlayStation Now.
No, that's all new.
I'm gonna double check just to see what they have.
There's PS3 titles that have been ported over, but
it didn't. They were never streamable.
No, I think these are all added onto the service as of now.
The service offers PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and PlayStation 4 games that can be played on PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, and Windows computers.
Yes, but those are the ones that have been ported over. So, like, there's certain games that they've been able to run on on natively on PS4 and PS5. It's a very limited set of titles that can run natively and they can be downloaded too. So it's weird.
No,
So
this is PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, and PlayStation 4 games on PlayStation Now can be streamed to PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, and PC.
Yes.
As of 2020, there are 800 games available.
Yeah, but there's a caveat in there, which is there are a set of unless I'm mistaking things, there's always been support for PS2, PS3, PS4, PS5 titles, but the PS2 and PS3 titles have always been like in this weird limbo state where the support for those types of titles were very limited. Now, maybe I'm wrong in the sense that like PS3 titles, the PS3 titles that they're talking about included streamable ones.
They literally had they literally had racks of PS3 hardware in the PlayStation Now data centers.
Okay. Well, either way, these are the different product packages.
As of now, right? Yeah. And the PS3 titles are streamed, and they can only be streamed, which is why they're not part of Deluxe.
Yes, because if you're lacking streaming services in your native country, then you're not going to be able to get.
Yeah, since they can't run on the native hardware.
Yeah, as of right now, I think there's available PS1, PS2, PSP, in Vita emulators that will allow the software to run natively on PS4 and PS5.
Vita was oddly missing in their announcements. They only said PSP.
Yeah, but Vita titles are present for some reason, so it may be one of these things where there's like a caveat with depending. Sony's dealing with emulation issues ongoing. Because they've had a functional PS1 emulator and a PSP emulator that worked on the PlayStation 3. But there was non-functional emulators for PS2, PS3, well, unless you're on a PS3, and PS Vita games. But there has been an effort to make those not just streamable, but also a select handful of them actually run natively, depending on the state of their emulator.
Yeah, the Vitas, they didn't announce the Vita. It could be that they're like, we're gonna have whatever titles we can support brought in under the PSP name, because it's PSP Vita, right? Like Vita was just the surname for that title or whatever, but for that console. But the someone did point out that like a lot of games on the PSP Vita are touchscreen based, and therefore you can't really do that on a PS5 or PS4.
Sure, you can.
Yeah, a bit maybe.
It's the back touch that's the biggest issue.
Yeah, that especially.
Yeah, it wasn't like with a lot of Sony first party game. There's a lot of titles that handled that, but there's a lot of games that just didn't bother with it because, as we've seen often in gaming, like touchscreen is just like more nice to have. The Switch has that issue. The DS had that issue. Like touchscreen gaming is more forced than it is actually supported in a lot of ways because it just takes you out of the game. Anyways, so some PS Vita games. It's also probably why they're not specifically calling it out as a support platform.
Yeah. So there are two major issues that I have with the PlayStation, like this raft of offerings that Sony's announced this, and they've sort of quietly, they've not made a point of any of these things, and it's rightfully so because they're not great points in their favor. One is their pricing tiers make no sense at all if you look at that. And not pricing tiers, their pricing strategy. So what we didn't mention in our big send up of all the features and everything was that let's take the premium tier as an example. You can pay $18 a month for the premium tier, or quarterly $50 a quarter, which is every 3 months. That's $200. Or if you pay monthly, it's like it turns out to be somewhere like $216. So if you pay quarterly, you save $16. Now, if you pay yearly, it's $120. You save an additional $80 by paying in a year. Like, it's a huge difference. That literally,
I will point out, though, this is something that they've consistently done, though. Right. So with PS Plus and PS Now, I know less about Now's pricing strategy, but PS Plus did do this. Like, you paid quarterly, you paid or basically if you paid
yeah.
for 3 months, it was different than the price for 1 month versus 1 year. You
Right,
get
right.
discounts that would compound over time.
Yeah, and the $10 a month works out to $120, which is literally 50% off if you just pay it in yearly increments at $60 a
And
year.
more like there's another hidden deal in there that they're not talking about in the same way like Sony kind of ignored, didn't want to talk about that you could buy Horizon Forbidden West at $60 and get the PS5 version of the game for free, because the PS5 version was $70. They're just like hoping people just didn't pay attention to it and would get tricked into buying the PS5 version of it.
Because why not?
I mean, yeah, exactly. Because why not? Because they've gotten a bit more money hungry lately.
They have. That's the other aspect of this. That my second thing is exactly
Well,
that.
let me finish my thought
Okay.
real quick.
Do it.
The secret deal is that if you buy PS Now, a subscription for PS Now, and you activate it, they're automatically taking whatever length of subscription you have and boosting it to the premium status.
Good deal.
Yeah, so if you're like, I
Jeez.
want to jump in on this, the best way to actually get in on it for the least amount of money is to get like a 12-month subscription to PS Now, and you'll pay like even like half of what the actual year subscription costs for it is. I think around now you can probably get a year of PS Plus and a year of Now for about $40 a piece, so $80 total, which I think the highest tier is what, $120 for a year, so you get to save yourself from $40 from that.
Yeah, it's a little bit weird if you already have one of the subscriptions but not the other. In terms of how you calculate your stuff, probably still a win, but yeah. The thing the last thing I'll say about this pricing tier that boggled my mind was that the Xbox Game Pass or Microsoft Game Pass Ultimate, their top tier, you can stream on any device system, or their subscription service it's $15 a month flat, which works out to what is it? It's 150 for 10 months plus 30, so $180.
Mm-hmm.
So you do get a substantially better deal with the premium than you do over Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, but only if you buy yearly. Only if you buy yearly. If you buy any other option, it's a significantly worse pricing deal. You're paying $20 more for something that actually, and this is my next point, has something less than what Microsoft's offering is. So here's the main difference. My number two on dinging Sony for this announcement. Microsoft Game Pass is proving itself partially, and Microsoft is buying all of these publishers and game development studios to guarantee that they are going to have titles day and date on Game Pass.
Yes.
Along with the games that they're selling on disc and in stores and digital stores, whatever, and on Windows. They want that stuff guaranteed on Game Pass so that their subscribers benefit day and date. Sony has specifically come out and said all of our first-party titles, which are awesome in these huge AAA costs and everything, will not be on PlayStation Plus whatever tier for many, many, many months until after their launch. They see this as they would be eating their own lunch, and therefore you are never going to get, at least until Sony decides to change their tune on this, you are never going to get like Horizon Forbidden West or Ratchet and Clank, the Rift in Time, or Gran Turismo 7, or the upcoming God of War. You're not going to see those for half a year to a year until they start to see their sales dip and they sort of hit a long tail.
So they're like weirdly changing their tune on that. It's just
are they? Because
yes.
They literally came out a day or two ago, the CEO, and came out and said, here's why we're doing it. And it was because they said, it costs, we need to set, we set our prices assuming a certain number of sales at $70 a sale.
Yeah.
And that determines how much the budget is, and we sort of make a guesstimate about how many people are going to buy it. And if we do this premium thing and guarantee that people are going to get into it, that eats into that cost, and we won't be able to make the games we make. That was literally what he said.
Yeah, well, until the model proves itself out, right? Like Microsoft is saying,
Sure.
Microsoft's gamble is we will take the money or losses to make this a successful platform, even though it may not be a successful financial platform for
Initially,
years.
yeah. Right.
Not even just initially, for years. For years, they will not be able to make their production budgets back. And they're willing to eat that. Sony can't do that. They don't have the same sort of backing from any other division besides their photo group that makes like butt tons of money for them.
Yeah, for a while, there was a period in like the aughts, I believe, where the only profitable sector in Sony was PlayStation.
I mean, honestly, like they're two
money.
successful sectors right now are gaming and photo.
Like cameras and lenses and stuff.
And sensors.
Right, I guess right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, they're in a sticky place. They can't necessarily gamble the same way Microsoft does.
Right.
And that means that the product that they're going to deliver is going to be worse than what Microsoft offers. So like it's not that I don't disagree with their business decisions, it's just that they will not be able to provide a competing platform for some time until it's actually proven out, or the amount of subscribers actually merits the sort of the move to spice up and get more subscribers onto the platform by offering things like day and date releases. But they did say they're going to be moving and partnering with other games to make games day one release, similar to what Xbox Game Pass is doing. And they did suggest that certain games could be seeing a release on PlayStation Premium earlier. Like I could imagine a game like Gran Turismo 7 does that because the game has a functional, although rightly angered people with their monetary system in the game.
Oh, did they? I haven't heard about this.
Yeah, I mean they were bad actors on it. They actually did like justifiably. People were justifiably angered at Sony in their approach to how they handled the monetary system in Gran Turismo 7. And we also know that they're very much pursuing a bunch of online persistent games that I imagine will have a cost associated with the buying a physical version, but would not have a reasonable, like it makes no sense for you to be playing a PlayStation only title that requires PlayStation Plus that you can just wrap into a $3 a month additional charge onto what you're already paying to play that game. So I think that's what they're looking to do to spice up and boost their services, is basically have Jade Raymond Studio and Bungie develop these massively online multiplayer games. Possibly PlayStation Home makes it on that's platform as well, as part of the package. So you play it and you get access to these online only titles.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I also imagine that The Last of Us multiplayer will do the same thing. Like there won't be a cost involved with it unless you want to buy it and play it on PlayStation Plus Essential. But so that's what I imagine being the case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think to me, part of the thing that irks me about the Sony approach here is that I don't think that their initial blog announcement mentioned the fact that their own first-party titles would not be part of this. Which for me is like, if you're coming in second and you're offering a system that sounds an awful lot like your competitor stuff, where they're pushing for this stuff, you sort of are setting expectations. And if you're not managing that, like if I were to sign up for a year of this, like awesome, now I can just play the games, I'll pay my yearly fee, and I get the Sony catalog. Awesome. If I don't get the Sony catalog, now I'm suddenly upset because I realize I've paid $120 for the year of this access, and now I have to pay $70 for each title that I want to play. anyway, when really I was like, this is a great deal for me because $120 gets me all of the $70 titles day and date.
Yeah, I mean, it's a communication issue that they're going to have to deal with because
Yeah,
they can't offer a Game Pass like solution.
right.
They can't eat losses like Microsoft can. They have to provide something different. It's just a matter of whether or not they're communicating that, hey, their new premium tier offers games that are not day and date. But they're also being specific that, or have mentioned it before. So I guess if you're paying attention to game news, you would be aware of it. If you're kind of like a general consumer, you may not be aware that games are released on day and date. But then again, that may also be the same case with Game Pass. Like, you may not actually realize that there's a bunch of day and date titles being released by Microsoft Studios going to the platform. So I don't know. Like, my biggest issue with Sony is that they're not necessarily the rollout of those products. Like, you can determine if it's for you or not. Right. My biggest issue with PlayStation is that they've been doing some pretty dicey moves with the way that they're kind of exploiting their gamer base. That if they continue to do that, they're going to lose. They're going to stir ire, and it does not work well for them in the long run.
Yeah, they'll somewhat alienate their player base.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to the next topic, Eric.
Let's do it. Woo!
What is the next topic, Eric?
Our next topic is. Can you do me a drum roll? Oh, perfect. Absolutely came right through the speaker. Yeah, PlayStation is getting VRR and a feature update.
Yeah.
Variable refresh rendering. Variable refresh rate rendering. This has sort of been a known thing. It's sort of just been a when. When is it coming?
Yeah, because early on they announced it specifically. They're like, we're gonna support it, but
we'll have it.
Yeah.
It's an HDMI 2.1 sort of feature, and we'll be there. They didn't have it out of the box to get go, which was a big thing that people comparing the brand new consoles made a point of. Microsoft built it into the console. Sony was doing their own custom implementation, and it took them a while to get it in. It's still not in at the time of broadcast here, but it's
probably going to be like a couple of months before it actually does get in, because it's going to be part of their next big
release.
Update.
Yeah. So what can you give me a quick overview of what VRR is?
Well, it's variable refresh rate. It's generally speaking a communication channel that goes back to the TV to basically tell the TV what the current frame rate is. And the TV, if it supports VRR, and by that it means it can support a refresh rate that is all over the place, then it can update and basically match the refresh rate of the game at the time, or the frame rate of the game at the time,
up to whatever refresh rate it supports.
Right. So
natively.
A lot of current 2.1 TVs can support up to 120 hertz. Some older TVs only 60 hertz or less.
Which, to be clear, when we talk about hertz or whatever, you can just basically say FPS. 120 hertz television, is 120 FPS TV. Yep. The monitor will natively refresh at 120.
Yeah. So why is VRR good?
Yeah. So VRR is good because it allows, when the game finishes rendering a frame of imagery, and it says, "Hey game, I'm ready. Hey display, show these pixels." In a typical basic scenario, there's a lot of kind of like communication that happens where, let me back out. What it does for the consumer, instead of getting into the details, variable refresh rate will effectively mean that the game will feel smoother when you play it. It will respond more quickly, as fast as the game itself is able to do. So you may not reach 120 FPS, that's smooth 120, but it'll fluctuate, and you'll still gain the benefits of the game's ability to hit maybe 87 FPS. It'll still feel better than 60. It'll be more smooth than 60 FPS. And give you more direct feedback as to what's going on inside the screen at a given time.
Yeah, and more so actually for the frame drops. If a game peak performance is at 60 frames per second, and you drop to 58 frames or 55 frames per second, the biggest issue is that the sort of updating that you get from the TV, which is refreshing 60 times a second, and the games which refreshing 55 times a second, is you can get things like screen tearing. You get where like parts of the frame are updated at once, and more so you get like a lot of weird juddering and hiccuping with the frame pacing, which is, if you're sensitive to it, is quite noticeable. It gets even more noticeable when you start going even at lower frame rates, because basically the percentage of the frame drop accounts for a longer amount of time that you see the frame on screen. So yeah, like if it's a 30 frames per second game and you get dropped down to like 25 frames per second, like you might on the Matrix demo, it's if the frame pace is matching it, you're seeing the frame rate update at the time the game can update, and not when the TV and they kind of drop out of sync with each other, and you're getting frame pacing that doesn't match when the TV's updating and when the game's updating. So smoother, not just because you can support now like frame rates that might exceed beyond 60 frames per second, but also when you drop below, the TV is matching it and allowing for a smoother sort of presentation.
Yep.
Something that is worth noting, Microsoft does has this part of the reason why Sony's like, well, we'll use it too. Some newer TVs, expensive TVs that can support VRR. The way Microsoft does it is on a global, a global application of it, but it's problematic because some games do not handle this well. And I'm not entirely sure the technical reasons for why it handles poorly, but some games that got VRR updates perform considerably worse and look considerably worse than you get a lot of artifacting issues that were just not there prior when it was updating at its variable frame rate, but not sending the information to the TV. Now, what Sony kind of implemented is that it's likely on a per game basis, so it's supported by the PlayStation, but each game developer has to patch to support VRR, and so game developers are like, nope, we built the game to run at 60 frames per second on a 60 frames per second refresh. What are you doing, Eric?
Oh, is that coming through?
It sure is.
That is really, really weird. That should have been going through my headphones. I have no idea why the hell that was going.
Not just that, but your camera was going.
Oh, well, the camera was moving because I was trying to find the pause button on that video that I was looking up, just trying to see what like some of the issues on the Xbox were with the VRR, just to see like get a visual sense to get what, because you were just talking about this, and I was like, oh, I haven't heard about this, and then I apologize, everybody.
Yeah, because everybody wants to see your stomach.
Well, that too, yeah. I got my nice tum tum. But beyond that was the that audio. I'm surprised must have been.
No, the audio was fine. It was the video. That's that you just cranking down your camera and slowly going towards your crotchal region.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Like.
Yeah. Exactly.
Let's not do that. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, but the audio should have been coming through my headphones, and it should not have been making it through.
No, it wasn't. So.
Oh, then okay. Then I'm sorry. I thought I was very surprised. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
So on a per game basis, it allows developers to determine when they should add it, and maybe it's a functional setting that you can turn on and off depending on your display capabilities, or as the PlayStation 5 does things, basically you can say, I want games that can render at 120 frames per second to be defaulted on when it's like a global setting that applies to games that can support it. So presumably with VRR, if you like, hey, I want VRR to be on because my TV supports it, any games that support it will check that setting on when the game has it as an option. Mm-hmm. Did you find out anything interesting that you want to talk about, or no?
No, it just looks like the video is pretty smooth on the demo that I'm looking at. There was one that someone showed like they had the game that they were showcasing. So part of this is like maybe for some people testing it appears to be like, is it the Xbox or is it my TV, or is it some incompatibility between how the two communicate VRR? Because it was like when you look up Xbox VRR, it literally has the results are like LGCX VRR playing the medium, and then LG, like Samsung Q something VRR playing another game, right? Like it's all very specific between system, display, and game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How
no,
they
I mean,
work.
and that's why I think probably like a per game allows the games to be tested before they turn it on, which is something
Yeah.
that's probably useful because
Hopefully, like this, the thing that I'm concerned about is that it might take a little bit of time for developers to really get a handle on this. And I say that partially because I've been looking at some of the problems with Horizon Forbidden West recently, where I don't have the game yet, but I've seen articles about this and looked into it, where they have problems with their HDR light and the brightness problems, where their dynamic range gets squished at times, and when there's camera movement, it squishes and it comes back, and then they have other issues where when you do their calibration UI, you go in and play with their the brightness, and like in the screen, people who have calibration monitors will show, yeah, it with this demo screen, here is where the max brightness is. But when we go out of this menu and we go into the game, now when I look up at the sun, and the brightness shoots way beyond the maximum in that image. So they're not doing a good job of sort of limiting the brightness of the colors and everything presented in their frames based on how that works, which leads me to be concerned about how the developers will handle another piece of display technology that's sort of esoteric.
yeah.
Well, these are complicated pieces of things, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just adds more wrenches into when you have to test for a game, like what kind of displays and everything else.
Right.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
But I mean, we're at the beginning of a new generation. They're learning.
Well, yeah. Hopefully, in the next 3-5 years, those games will be rock solid, and we'll just turn them on, and it'll be like, damn, right?
Yeah,
like, it's gonna be great.
I did have a good example, but I can't remember what it was. But basically, like when like at the beginning of a generation, they're like, "This is the new cool tech," and they're putting in every game, and every game's just going to have this moving forward. And it's like once they got a hold of it, but it realized it was like a performance issue. Like games started dropping it in favor of like I think it was like 1080p, right? Like hitting 1080p
yes.
as like a on games is like, this is what we're going to. We're going to get 1080p. It's really important to us, and then as games went on, they're like, we're not actually shooting for 1080p anymore.
Yeah, especially when you had consoles like the 360 that did. I think the 360 did the automatic upscaling to 1080p.
Yeah, it had an upscaler, post-processing upscaler that would.
So if you did like half resolution 540p, it would upscale to
yeah
to 1080.
And
which
I
clearly
feel
wasn't
like
as good, but
I feel like this is the same thing with like VRR 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second and 4K. It's just like all these things are things that are variable that you would turn on and off depending on how it's your performance, and developers will, as they get more used to developing on the newest hardware, are going to pick and choose what works best for their game.
yeah, we've even seen such a crazy array of quality and sort of like adherence to the goal when it comes to games that have settings for performance versus resolution versus like rendering, right? They have multiple different modes, and every game makes different decisions about what it means to them and how much they care about hitting the target frame rates that they set, right? Like it, yeah.
Yep.
Wild West right now.
A little bit. All right, let's move to the next topic. PSVR2 gets what?
I said bada bing, bada boom.
Yep. PSVR2 gets shown behind closed doors at GDC. Yep. Not much to report on here. I think the most interesting thing is the performance and stuff that came out of Unity's panel. But basically, PSVR2, we've had two major announcements from Sony, which was here's the headset and controller. Or actually, excuse me, here's the controller first. And they showed off the tech that was going to be in the controller and acknowledged that it's actually real. And then a couple months ago, they showed off the headset finally and formalized the specs behind it. So it was no surprise that it was actually at GDC, giving it that it's a game developers conference. And if they want buy-in from the developers community, they really need to be garnering interest from the developers. And if this is going to be a big push by Sony, they need that so that they come out of the gate with a handful of quality titles. So, shown at GDC behind closed doors to probably very specific developers that Sony's probably carrying interest with and favor. They also have a pretty large fund to be working with developers to hit initiatives that they're interested in. The more interesting thing, I guess, was from Unity, who is constantly evolving their engine tech to be adaptive to all types of needs. And during this event, they sort of talked about the advancements in VR and the things that they're supporting with within Unity. Do you want to talk a bit about what those what they discussed at the Unity panel?
Yeah, I mean, there were sort of two major bullet points that highlights that came out of this. To be clear, neither of us attended that while we were at GDC. We were not privy to the information. We were getting this secondhand. But basically, there were some reports about how the technology like foveated rendering affects the frame rate that they're able to get out of the devices, even with the higher resolution displays and everything.
Yeah, 4K displays for the
right
eyepieces.
Per eye.
Yep.
Yeah. And what the numbers that were cited were that foveated rendering alone, with that with that turned on, gave a 2.5x increase to the frame rate, of the game or demo, whatever they were building and testing with. And then if they did foveated rendering and eye tracking, like following your eyes to make sure that as you moved, it did it only rendered what it needed to in the view, then it saw a combined with those two things, a 3.6x increase in frame rendering performance.
Yeah. Do you have any idea why that might be? Because it doesn't necessarily follow logic, except unless you assume they're going to do one thing over another.
I mean, yeah, the it makes sense to me on a number of cases, because you're the actual pixels that you have to like you can render. Foveated rendering is rendering, correct me if I'm wrong, but foveated rendering is rendering one little area at high fidelity and then sort of stepping back from there.
Yeah, it's almost like LOD, but
right.
for field of vision.
Right. For a frame, right? Like you and I as humans, we see very well in a very specific narrow range at what we're looking at. Everything out of there is blurry, and our brain does generally a pretty good job of filling in details. And at that point, the question is like, well, why do we show everything at the full fidelity when the eye doesn't perceive it that way anyway? There aren't enough cones and rods in your eye in order to pick up the light and create a crisp image out of it. So like, why not just show a blurry image?
Right.
So that's the sort of idea, is that they're going to do one small area on the screen at high fidelity, and the rest of it can be lower fidelity, which cuts back on the amount of GPU fill rate issues and the number of basically
basically allows you to hit higher frame rates.
Right.
Which I mean, you see in these two data points that they provided.
Yeah.
The thing I find interesting, though, is like, okay, so you go, okay, if it's just foveated rendering, it means that in each eye within the lens, you are basically saying, like, here's an area which is going to be high, and everything outside of that will be low, which would require you to turn your head to see everything in crisp detail. My guess is the reason why it's only a 2.5 increase without eye tracking is that they have to do a wider field of view that's in crisp detail, and then let it fall off in a shorter amount of distance for just doing foveated rendering. With eye tracking, they could probably narrow what actually is rendered in more crisply based off of where your eye position is. So they're able to narrow it further and get more rendering boost out of it without causing adverse effects to the person who's looking at the game.
Yeah, it's a good point. Being able to say, we know exactly where you're looking, so we'll just focus that down even slightly more. And yeah, I mean, what's interesting to me, I don't remember if Sony has any particular APIs for this, but Microsoft has those APIs where they can do dynamic LOD of meshes.
Yes.
With their as part of the new DirectX features they added for the Series X and Series S. And that sounds like perfect for this type of rendering model, where you imagine you have a big model that spans your field of view. The spot you're looking at will have the full quality model, and then you can sort of stream in just the lower quality, lower LOD models for the outside of that. Then it's not just that your fill rate changes, which fill rate is how many pixels are sort of rendered at a time, right? The higher your resolution and your frame rate, the more fill rate you need. So, if you cut down the number of pixels that are rendered because you're doing a blurry, like bigger squares for the off-screen stuff, then that's one side of the computation. The other side is vertices of 3D models and 3D objects, which are, like all the edges and the things that create edges for the triangles that get rendered into pixels. Those are very detailed, and they take up memory. They take up processing time as each vertex gets shaded and everything. So if you can reduce that set as well, then that's huge. And I assume that either Sony has a response to this or their own API for this, or that like Unity in their engine are looking at ways to reduce to kind of like swap dynamically which model is used at any given time, so that they can handle that.
I mean, I'm sure it's both, but I think Sony specifically said this is one of the techs having the fill rate be able to change based off of what you're looking at, which is similar to what Microsoft is doing. Both for vertex fill and shader, they're specifically implementing it for the headset for this reason, because they need to. I don't know if it's specifically hardware that they have to support this, which I think Microsoft does, or if it's a software-based solution for PlayStation. But either way, it will be supported in some capacity.
Sweet. I mean, that's probably part of their like speed up there, which is huge. That is a big speed up, especially when you're targeting 4K.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? Like it's hitting 4K at 60 frames per second at minimum, and I think for the VR they need to hit closer to 120 to have a comfortable viewing experience. Like 90, I think, is the minimum. There's ways of tricking it by like updating each eye differently, but either way. These things are costly. To render things in VR, it's costly because of just how much updating you have to do. So these sort of techniques make it a lot more affordable graphically to achieve higher graphic fidelity in a VR setting.
I mean, you need like 90 FPS minimum to make people not feel sick when they're when you're in VR. And then if you're trying to render two separate, similar but slightly different angles, let's say, views of the world that are both 4K at 90 frames per second from the same device that with just one screen might struggle to hit 4K, 4K 60 for that matter. Now you're like, okay, where is this magic coming from? And this is what we're talking about with the foveated rendering and eye tracking. That lets them seriously target much nicer fidelity.
And get games that look like a next generation VR headset should. All right. Well, let's move to the very last topic. We're kind of going long in the tooth. We're almost at 2 hours. I'm sure no one's hanging out with us anymore, but
you can skip ahead sometime and they come in and watch it later.
Yeah.
Good times.
Either way, What's the next topic, Eric?
The next topic is the Zelda Breath of the Wild follow-up has been delayed to 2023.
It's kind of expected.
Yep. I mean, this is pretty par for the course for Nintendo.
Yeah, why is it expected?
I mean, the game that they showed off before didn't seem sort of almost like a tech demo that we haven't seen.
I mean, which is at E3 2021.
Yeah, last year.
Yeah, last year at E3.
Around that time, right?
They showed off their demo, and I was like, "Ooh, that game does not look anywhere close to being done."
It did not at all. And they said we have a year, and you're like, ah,
Yeah, Nintendo.
it'll be
Really?
out next year. You're like, even if you imagine it, it literally ships December 20th.
Yeah.
That's still going to be tight for a game at the scale of what Breath of the Wild was and how far along that looked. The amount of content it looked like they were still iterating on sort of the game like mechanics concepts, and
Yeah.
how the world would play.
Because
And
they're adding like some interesting new flight mechanics that weren't present before.
right, yeah, it looks like they're kind of going to an extent. I never played it, but from what I saw of Skyward Sword, they're sort of taking some of the ideas that they toyed with there and are now adding them into Breath of the Wild style game, mixing them into the
Yeah.
Breath of the Wild space. Which, I think in their announcement of delay, they showed some new footage, slightly, at least to me. It might have been stuff they announced before. I don't know. It looked sort of new to me, but it looked like they were doubling down on this is Breath of the Wild sort of landscape on the ground and the continent and whatever, with another aspect of these floating islands that you can go up and visit, and that have theoretically gameplay on them and other reasons that you would go there. Like, yeah, it seemed a bit of a promise to.
Yeah. I think there's also some interesting timing here. Like the Switch, for all of its recent success,
Yeah,
and on top of that, hardware issues that are only made worse by Russian warfare going on and all that.
yeah,
It's still like anybody who thinks that the Switch really has like another 2-3 years in it, I think are kind of lying to themselves. There is at least that amount of games going to be rolling out because of the popularity of Switch, but we've said this before on it. It's like the biggest issue with Switch really is that, well, the hardware is being the main processor and is being retired, but beyond that, the developers are walking further and further away from what the Switch is capable of doing and relying more and more on streaming, which is not an ideal way to be playing the game
No.
entirely.
Especially not a handheld. That part of the benefit is taking it with you, and
Yes.
if you're on a plane, you can't play that type of game.
Or if you don't have like a dedicated 5G
Yeah.
router attached to it. Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, these are a lot of issues with it. And like, yeah, maybe Nintendo can keep rolling out software, but Nintendo's taken a very weird approach that people should take note of, which is they're pumping out games like Splatoon, and they recently released Metroid and games of that nature. But there's Kirby is another one. But these aren't usually their A tier stuff. Their A tier stuff being Mario, Zelda. And there's also like a known Metroid Prime that's somewhere announced, but never shown beyond that. So I still think that had things not gone sour in 2020, that we would be talking about a new Switch piece of hardware right now, if not already have it in our hands. It's well within Zelda to be one of the first titles on a brand new piece of hardware. They've done that with Twilight Princess and with Breath of the Wild. So it wouldn't surprise me if they got one out of Switch and Switch next.
Right. And that's what was going to be my point, was that even Breath of the Wild was also released on the Wii U. And the Twilight Princess was released on the Wii and the Wii U.
Yes. No, not the Wii.
No, I'm sorry.
GameCube.
It was the GameCube and the Wii.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have Zelda has a very long history now of having the major title
It being the
released.
bridge title, the weird
the
bridge title.
Yeah, exactly. It's in both. And this, I had not even considered that until you said, like, there might be something more to this.
Yeah, I mean, like, it looks understandably behind.
Yeah.
Like from what they showed last, but to be showing a full gameplay reveal, which is unlike Nintendo, at an E3, and then only to have it be like, oh, it's getting bumped 2 years. That's kind of a big stretch for them, because usually they show titles in gameplay form closer to its ability to release. Prior to that, they'll sometimes show off a tech demo, or they'll show something else, like a trailer or something like that that doesn't really show much beyond, you know, like a promise of what the gameplay might be or that it exists. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a good chance this could be a bridge title again, but who knows? I mean, we got 2 Zelda titles.
Yeah.
And the Wii U got 1 bridge title, and that was it. Well,
What had Skyward Sword?
GameCube had Skyward, or we had Skyward Sword. So
Was it Wii and not
Yes.
Wii U?
yes, I think.
I'm going to quickly look it up.
Yeah, it was on the Wii. I just had no interest in playing it.
Yeah, it was 2011. So, yep, for the Wii. Yep. So, yeah, I didn't either. By that time, the
It
Wii
might have
was so
also been a
ancient.
bridge title. I mean, if it was on the Wii U as well, I just don't know if it was released like, a year afterwards. If it was release day and date, they didn't need to because you could play on the Wii U and it wasn't an issue.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, the Wii was backwards. Wii U was backwards compatible with Wii.
Yeah.
Yep. It doesn't mention the Wii U, I think, on their Wikipedia page. This is Wii, so yeah. The yeah. So the one thing I'm sort of thinking is, when do we think we would see an announcement of the next console? I'm guessing not at a Nintendo Direct at the E3 era or phase this year, but probably early next year, because they don't want to cannibalize sort of their holiday sales.
Their biggest thing though is they don't have a large setup of games. Like their games are their B tier, and even though Kirby might be a great game and Splatoon might be a great game, like that's never been the case with. There's never been a problem for Nintendo. The problem is them rolling out their biggest games. Like they're not doing a new Mario Kart; they're just releasing more tracks. They're like milking more time, and they're still rolling out. And they've been doing this since like the Wii's or the Switch's lifetime, is like just rolling out Wii U games that had already been developed and adding some things to it. But like this has been happening for now like 3 years. We're like, okay, what's the next Nintendo game? We're like Mario 3D Land, but there's a Bowser add-on. You're like, yeah, well, we have that on the Wii U. You're like, yeah, but no one played it on the Wii U, so now you get to have it. So you look at like what's been in development from Nintendo specifically, and it's smaller than it usually is.
Don't forget that I think we do have a new Mario Strikers game coming.
Yeah, but like again, like a B game, like a perfectly fine game, but like it's the B game. Like last year it was Mario Golf, right? Like it
was Mario Golf. Yeah, Mario Strikers coming up. There was another one. Oh, it was the I don't even remember if this is out yet or not. But it was the Wii Sports or the
they redid they're redoing. It was like it's a Wii Sports rematch, but like redo, but
right, but for the Switch. I don't remember what the title. It's like.
Well, it's not called Wii Sports.
It's like Sports Resort or something like that.
Yeah, something. I don't remember.
Yeah, neither do I. But
again, Nintendo makes quality software, but they have their like A-list games, and they've not had any or have announced any besides Zelda. And Zelda getting pushed out another year indicates that A, they don't want to show anything about a next Mario game, and B, they've been very content with the last 2 years of Switch being like rehashes of Wii U titles. With their B class games making it onto the platform since.
Yeah,
I guess this year they're like Advance Wars. Remember that DS game that you guys all loved? So you're like, yes.
Yeah.
okay.
Here's my guess. The Switch was launched in March of 2017.
Mm-hmm.
If we assume that the Switch next hardware is going to follow that similar like springtime's initial sale, then it'll be March of 2023. That's presumably when we would see Zelda as well. Do you think we would get the announcement about the new console coming at like in the fall this year at the E3 equivalent? Or
I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't do it at E3 and then they waited, because if they're talking about a springtime launch, then pushing it into like a fall information dump and then doing the ramp up for actual release in the fall. But they may also not be able to, or in the spring, but they may also not be able to do that, like because hardware constraints may be causing them a bigger issue, that they're just like, we cannot do another spring release. We're gonna have to do like a fall release and try to capitalize on
holiday sales.
holiday sales.
Yeah, in that case,
Not the least of which because PlayStation and Xbox going into this year holiday season will still be a high demand item just because of the resource constraint.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I mean, PlayStation 5 still go for like $700, $800 on eBay.
Yeah. Let me say that when I can totally see Nintendo when their new Switch whatever follow-up launches, that new hardware launches, they'll probably still sell the OLED Switch Portable.
Yeah.
And just discontinue the one that's also the standard Switch.
Yep.
And they'll sell that for a while, slowly mark it down in price, because it still has a massive library of games, and people still can play it. It'll probably just focus more on the portable side, and then put more of their new
they'll do another hardware release where they make it more efficient,
more small,
smaller. I mean, the processor, they're not getting any more out of that processor. I mean, they like not only that, but they're not going to be shrinking the die size further. Like which is like usually you get like 3 iterations of a die where they're like, okay, we made it smaller. Okay, now we made it really small, and now it's now the PlayStation can run on
itty bitty. Well,
yeah, like they do things like that, and they've not been able to do that for like 4 years now. I don't think they're going to be able to do it in like the next iteration of Switch hardware, but presumably they will do another version of the Switch that is intended for like the last legs of its life, which is pretty typical for them.
Yeah.
Anyways, we should wrap it up. We're almost at 2 hours.
Woo! Long one.
All right. Thanks everybody.
There's a lot to catch up on.
Yeah, there's a lot of news. Thanks everybody for tuning in or watching our video after the fact on YouTube. But we'll catch you again next week.